On today's show, we take a look at a couple preseason rankings for Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., the ESPN top 100 list headed into the season, as well as CBS putting out a report of their top 22 point guards heading into the 2022-2023 NBA season. We'll discuss where Jalen Green and KPJ landed or didn't land on their respective lists. We'll also take a look at some reporting out of Shams Charania about the upcoming CBA discussion negotiations right around the corner for the NBA, how some of those logistics play into the future for this Houston Rockets team. All that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the host of Rockets Watch. You can follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. On today's show, we're going to take a look at a couple preseason rankings rolling into this year's NBA campaign. Training camp right around the corner. ESPN's top 100 players for the season, as well as CBS putting out a list of their 22 best players at each position. And we're going to take a look at the point guard list that KPJ did not find himself on rolling into the season. Is that a fair assessment of KPJ's skills as a point guard? We're going to get there in segment 2. And then segment 3, we're going to talk about the potential ramifications of the upcoming CBA collective bargaining agreement, discussion, negotiations that are right around the corner for the NBA landscape, and a couple of the implications as reported by Shams Charania, a couple of the big table topics, I should say, that are up for discussion in this next, iteration of the CBA, and we're going to talk about those two topics. The one and done rule, basically, as it relates to age to declare for the NBA draft and how that relates back to the Houston Rockets, as well as potential future salary cap ramifications for this Houston Rockets team. But let's start with the ESPN top 100 list and where Jalen Green found himself on said list. So I need to scroll all the way down because this is a long list. Hang on. All right, there we go. So we find ourselves Jalen Green ranked at number 62 on the ESPN top 100 list, which in a vacuum, I respect it, right? I mean, Jalen Green had a strong end to his campaign last season. He wound up, exploding to end the year as soon as, Christian Wood was shut down and he and KPJ were kind of given the reins and able to be the 1-2 punch offensively for the Houston Rockets. Closed things out with a 40-burger in his final game of his rookie campaign at home against the Hawks. It was a ton of fun. So I like that he's gotten that recognition, and I like that he has kind of jumped up the rankings here. Going into last season, he was ranked 96th. So there was a lot of optimism, a lot of hope for Jalen Green's rookie campaign. Now, we'll see exactly what Tim McMahon wrote about him in this little graph kind of describing Jalen Green. Tim McMahon wrote, Green has the potential to compete for scoring titles as he displayed down the stretch of his rookie season. He averaged 28.1 points on basically just under 50%, 43%, and 78% shooting splits in his last 9 games of the 2021-2022 season, scoring 30-plus points in 7 of his last 8, including the 41-point bomb in his season finale. He's an explosive leaper who should be a better finisher after a summer in the weight room. As we already know via Jalen Green's trainer, by courtesy of our good friend Roosh Williams, Jalen Green has added anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds of muscle this past offseason. So I wholeheartedly agree. I think Jalen Green should be able to take a significant leap this season. Is 62 fair? Is that a solid representation of where he will be amongst the other hundreds of NBA players? I'd maybe argue that you could have gone a little bit higher for Jalen Green. I mean, directly in and around Jalen Green, right above him, you have RJ Barrett at 63. You have Tyler Herro at 61, right below Jalen Green. Where I start to take a little bit of exception with this ESPN Top 100 list is the fact that many of Jalen Green's peers from this past draft class are significantly higher on this list, much higher than I think that they overall should be, because we go way further down on this list and then all the way ahead of guys like Zion Williamson at 40 and LaMelo Ball at 41 and even DeJounte Murray at 42. You have Scotty Barnes listed at number 39. So Scotty Barnes in his sophomore year, 39th best player in the NBA. That's a bit of a tough sell for me. A little bit further down the list, you have Evan Mobley listed at number 36. And then directly in front of Evan Mobley, you have Cade Cunningham listed at 35. 27 spots better than Jalen Green. Look, I'm going to be completely upfront. Jalen Green had a rough start to his rookie campaign. First off, so did Cade Cunningham. Missed the first chunk of his rookie year and then had a rough start when he finally came into the fold. Cade picked it up, though. Cade looked fantastic, as the season went along and got more comfortable, with his role in the system, all of that. But 27 spots better than Jalen Green seems a bit of a stretch for any of those three guys to be that, to have that big of a gap between where Jalen Green is at for those three guys. I feel like it's kind of, Jalen Green has this perception about him, right? And it's a similar perception, I should say, that kind of followed Devin Booker for a while, which is the, empty stats bucket getter. And until Jalen has a team around him that is able to start kind of growing and building towards something more than just being a bottom feeder organization, which is kind of where the Rockets are at, unfortunately, in this stage of the rebuilding process, I don't think he's going to get necessarily the respect that he deserves. And that's unfortunate because Jalen Green is an incredibly talented individual. And I don't think the gap in their respective production levels is 27 spots worth on this list. I just don't. And some of the players that, are behind these three now sophomore year players, little absurd. Like I think Draymond Green is a little bit further down this list at 43, Tyrese Maxey, Darius Garland, I'm sorry. Barnes and Mobley and Cade Cunningham should not be ahead of Darius Garland on this list. Now, this list is compiled based on who you think will be the better player in this season, right? So as far as projections go, it's kind of, trying to approximate where you think the talent level will land for this season specifically. So from that perspective, maybe the ESPN analysts who were all, polled for this, which I think it was like over 200 people polled for this, top 100 list. I mean, maybe they're just a lot lower on Darius Garland than they reasonably should be, but Garland was an all-star this past year, right? Do we expect Garland to suddenly regress and for Mobley, Barnes, and Cade to all be all-stars this season ahead of Darius Garland? I don't know. So I take a little bit of exception with how some of the rankings were, quantified on this list. In a vacuum, I'm okay with Jalen Green being at 62. I think, potentially some of the other guys and names on this list are a bit higher or potentially a bit lower than they should be. The one other point that I want to bring up here regarding Jalen Green's ranking on these ESPN 100 lists is another guy who we've compared pretty routinely to Jalen Green as far as his progress, his development, what he looks like, all of this is none other than another incredibly enticing two-guard prospect, and that is Anthony Edwards and his, fantastic career to this point where he is arguably, maybe not even arguably, I mean, maybe it's just, fact at this point that he's the Timberwolves' best player. Maybe it's still a toss-up between he and Karl-Anthony Towns. I think in the playoffs, though, this last year, Ant cemented himself as the best player on that team. Regardless of his off-court antics, Ant has been fantastic for the T-Wolves. Ant came into his rookie season unranked on the ESPN Top 100 list, was 52 going into his sophomore year. This year, he has made it into the top 25, which is not, at the time of this recording, is not unveiled yet. So I do not have the top 25 to go off of, but Ant is not in, outside of the top 25. He's not somewhere 25 to 100. He is going to be in that top 25 somewhere as ranked by ESPN. So looking at that trend, that pattern, and looking at the similarities between how Anthony Edwards has progressed in his career and how we hope Jalen Green will continue to progress in his career and hopefully see a year two leap, just like Anthony Edwards took, especially with the incredibly promising stretch to end Jalen Green's rookie year, which was, again, very similar to Anthony Edwards' rookie season. Jalen Green was ranked 96th coming into his rookie campaign. He is ranked 62nd coming into his sophomore year campaign, which is a little bit lower than Anthony Edwards. Edwards was ranked, again, 52 coming into his sophomore year campaign. where is Jalen Green going to be ranked next year? How much of a leap can Jalen Green take going into next season? Will Jalen Green potentially be at least in the eyes of the national media, in the eyes of ESPN analysts, whatever, will he be a top 25 force going into next year? If things stay consistent and if the parallels stay the same between he and Anthony Edwards and their respective career progressions, maybe we're talking about Jalen Green as a top 25 NBA player at this time next year. There's a lot of different things that he's got to do this season to prove that to not only himself, but to the Rockets organization, to the NBA at large. And frankly, again, Jalen Green has all the superstar potential in the world. So I think that he absolutely can achieve those lofty expectations. And obviously it's going to be a ton of fun to follow him this season and see what he does to make it to that point. But those are the Jalen Green rankings. Those are some of the thoughts and comparisons there. Coming up, I do want to talk about the Kevin Porter Jr. rankings, or I guess the unranked Kevin Porter Jr. as per CBS and their positional rankings. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. We're talking NBA, which is right around the corner. They've got you for MLB postseason, obviously everything NFL and college football. They've also got you covered for fighting odds, MMA, UFC, boxing, you name it. They've got you covered over at BetOnline. Right now, you can head over to BetOnline to take a look at who the odds-on favorites are for the NBA title this season. Right now, the Boston Celtics have slipped a little bit after the latest situation with Ime Udoka and his pending suspension from the Celtics organization. The Boston Celtics right now still the favorites at plus 600, but taking a bit of a point total hit. Golden State Warriors at plus 650. You got the Milwaukee Bucks at plus 700. And then rounding out the top five, you've got the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Clippers at plus 750 apiece. So for all of that and more odds, head to betonline.net to check out all the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little Kevin Porter Jr. Speaking of KPJ, if you like the KPJ shirt, there is a link to the Clutch Fan shop in the episode description. Use code Locked On or LO Rockets. I can't even remember the promo code off the top of my head. It's in the episode description though, because I have so many things rattling around in my brain. Go use the promo code. You get 10% off. There's a ton of great designs. Dave has done a fantastic job filling up the shop, getting ready for Rockets season. And I love this KPJ shirt. It's so soft. It's comfortable and it looks cool. I wish KPJ would bring his hair back though. I miss the KPJ hair. Anyways, let's talk KPJ as a point guard and this CBS Sports ranking going into the season. And I was very confused. I'll just say on the offset here, I was very confused as to why they ranked the top 22 guards or the top 22 players at every position. That was kind of throwing me off. And then I had this light bulb moment where I was like, oh, it's the 2022-2023 NBA season. That's the only thing that I can think of. I have not confirmed that anywhere. This is just my headcanon, but that's got to be the case. So point guard rankings by CBSSports.com. And we're just going to I figure we'll just roll through the list and figure out, we'll get through the names and we'll kind of discuss, because first off, I do think the idea of a point guard in today's NBA is so ambiguous, so vague, where there's different types of point guards in today's NBA, and KPJ is a very specific type of point guard. But I walk away from this list, and we'll go through the names here, and I'll give my thoughts after actually getting through the names on this list. So we'll start from 22 and work our way all the way down to number 1 on the list. So at number 22, the cutoff for CBS top 22 point guards, De'Aaron Fox for the Sacramento Kings. We've got Jalen Brunson for the Knicks at 21. Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers at number 20. Tyrese Maxey for the 76ers at number 19. Marcus Smart at number 18 for the Boston Celtics. Number 17 is CJ McCollum for the New Orleans Pelicans. Number 6, Cade Cunningham for the Detroit Pistons. Number 15 is LaMelo Ball for the Hornets. Number 14 is Ben Simmons, despite having not played the entirety of last season, for the Brooklyn Nets. Darius Garland at number 13 for Cleveland. Fred VanVleet, Steady Freddy, at number 12 for the Toronto Raptors. Number 11, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for OKC. Number 10, Jamal Murray for Denver Nuggets. Number 9, Kyrie Irving for Brooklyn. Number 8, Drew Holiday for Milwaukee. Number 7, James Harden for Philadelphia. Number 6, Chris Paul for the Phoenix Suns. Number 5 is Trae Young for the Atlanta Hawks. Then rounding out the last 4, we got Damian Lillard at number 4 for the Blazers. Number 3 is Ja Morant for the Grizzlies. Number 2 is Luka Doncic for the Dallas Mavericks. And then last but not least, Steph Curry, Wardell at number 1 for the Golden State Warriors. So a couple things stand out about this list before I get back into the KPJ discussion. First off, there are a couple different teams here that have more than one guy on this list, which by definition, how? Because if this is a point guard list, how do you have 2 point guards? So the 76ers have both James Harden and Tyrese Maxey on this list, and the Nets have both Ben Simmons and Kyrie Irving on this list. Now, I kind of take exception to that because that means that there are 10 teams without a single point guard on this list. So it's the bottom 1/3 of the NBA that did not make the cut on having a point guard on this list. So in that though, to me, James Harden is not a point guard. James Harden is a 2 guard that can facilitate and handle the ball at an elite high level. Just like, to me, Luka Doncic is not a point guard. Luka is like a point forward or a big 2 guard who handles the rock. And again, this is where we get into the whole argument of like positions, positionless basketball, whatever. Like, I like to think of some of these players as primary ball handlers, not necessarily point guards. So I already kind of take some exception with the list because of that. But as it stands, rolling through all the names on this list is frustrating, but there isn't a single name on this list that I can definitively put KPJ over. And that's just kind of where we're at. We need to see more out of KPJ, right? This is a very big year for KPJ. There's a lot riding on this year for him personally, for the Rockets organizationally, all of that. That's what this year is about. And I'm optimistic, and I hope we see KPJ take a leap this season to where he can be in the discussion for a top point guard in today's league. But this list, right, there's different types of point guards on this list. Like, again, you've got the more scoring-oriented point guards like a Kyrie Irving or like a Jamal Murray. You've got the guards on this list or the playmakers on this list who are more so, point forward tweener types like a Cade Cunningham or a Luka Doncic or a Ben Simmons, right? Like, Ben Simmons to me, even though he is, a point guard in the sense of the role that he occupies offensively on a team, he's 6'10". Like, he's not, in the body of a point guard. He's not checking other point guards, and he effectively plays a forward position on the floor. You're still going to line up a pair of guards next to him. You're not going to trot him out at the 1 on the depth chart, on the lineup, whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of frustrating. Elsewhere on this list, right, you have a guy like, Marcus Smart, who I don't think Marcus Smart's like a traditional point guard. He's kind of from the more so like Patrick Beverley school of like a 3-and-D guard that you would want next to a guy like a Ben Simmons or a Luka Doncic, somebody else who is going to handle a majority of the playmaking responsibility. So there are some question marks about the types of point guards on this list. And furthermore, there's some names on this list that I was frankly shocked weren't included here. There's DeJounte Murray, who was just coming off of an all-star season with San Antonio, right? Freshly traded to the Atlanta Hawks. He's not on this list. Colin Sexton, not on this list. Obviously coming off of an injury season, but had absurd numbers for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Very, very high ceiling, has proven a lot. Lonzo Ball, not on this list. Kevin Porter Jr., not on this list. Some more, proven guards, right? Like Mike Conley or a Kyle Lowry type, not on this list. So I'm very curious to know some of the thought process that went behind orchestrating and calibrating and putting together this list, because ultimately, what does this say about the national perception of Kevin Porter Jr., right? Again, is KPJ realistically in the bottom 1/3 of guards at the NBA level? And I think right now, that's enough evidence to say, yeah, there are effectively 20 guards that are better than KPJ right now. Or at least there are 20 teams with better starting point guards than Kevin Porter Jr. Does that mean that he can't reach new levels and reach new heights and become, an even better version of himself and take a step up this season and average, something like 18-7, 18-8, and be, a very, very solid starting guard moving forward? Absolutely not. That's what the season's about. He can try to, and I think he is set up for a ton of success this year, right? Last year was the turbulent year, right? Trying to learn the point guard position, all of this, trying to get acclimated, everything. This year is the year where it's make or break for him. Not necessarily make or break as an NBA player, but I think this year is make or break for him as a point guard in the NBA, right? Maybe KPJ has a role moving forward, but maybe it's as a sixth man, or maybe it's moving him back to his more natural position of like the 2 or the 3. But this year is the year that we will know if KPJ can be a top tier, maybe not top tier, but can be a top 20, top 15 point guard at the NBA level. And when you look down this list at what some of these guys are being paid versus, the argument of what to pay or what not to pay Kevin Porter Jr., the fact that you can't sit here and definitively say that KPJ is at least a top 20 guard in the NBA, then yeah, I think that's why you're sitting here thinking, all right, well, push down, kick the can down the road for the extension discussion. Because if you can't actually sit here and give concrete evidence, because I can't put KPJ above De'Aaron Fox. I can't put him above Jalen Brunson. I think that KPJ and Marcus Smart are inherently two different types of players, so I don't even feel like trying to evaluate those two guys next to each other. And even some of the names that aren't on this list, right? DeJounte Murray provides a lot more from a defensive standpoint, not quite the offensive force or shooter that KPJ is, but DeJounte Murray, evidence of success, made it to an all-star team, right? Has had, higher highs and more consistent highs than KPJ. Lonzo Ball, fantastic feel for the game, right? Not necessarily the offensive bag that KPJ has, but a significantly better feel for the game as a floor general, as a point guard, and just leaps and bounds better defensively than KPJ. And arguably right on the same level as far as just his efficiency numbers go. So, from that standpoint, depending on how much you value KPJ's offensive repertoire, his arsenal, then, for me, I think it's a bit of a coin flip between those two guys, maybe, as to who I would want moving forward, potential-wise, all of that. Colin Sexton, Colin Sexton should probably be on this list. Maybe Colin Sexton should be on this list over a guy like Jalen Brunson, if they're not factoring in potential, if they're only factoring in what has been done to this point. So this was an interesting ranking to me, and it just kind of shows the dilemma that the Houston Rockets are in, and how important this year is specifically for KPJ, for his future, and for his future specifically as a point guard in today's NBA. Because if from a national perspective, he doesn't even crack the top 20, then yeah, that's not a guy that you feel comfortable giving that level of an extension to quite just yet. Paying that amount of money to $15 to $20 million a year to not even be a top 20 point guard, you got to kind of pump the brakes there a little bit. So I don't want this to be a KPJ bashing session, because that's not what it should be. If anything, I hope that, something like this puts an even bigger chip on KPJ's shoulder, because I want to see him come out and prove everybody wrong this season. I want to see KPJ come out and light it up. I would be ecstatic if KPJ came out and had such a phenomenal season that the Rockets had no choice but to further down the line next offseason max him, match a contract, whatever offers come flying his way, because that means he had a baller year, right? I'm okay with that outcome. The outcome I'm not okay with is being on the hook for $60 million over 4 years, $45 million over 3 years for a guy who might just be a sixth man, or who might not really be a point guard at the NBA level, who might be very duplicative at the end of the day of the skill set that the Rockets already have in Jalen Green as their two guard of the future. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of question marks, but I thought these two rankings, both the ESPN top 100 for Jalen Green and the CBS top 22 point guards, were interesting for those two guys from their respective outlooks for this season. Coming up, I do want to talk about some of the reported rumors, as reported by Shams Charania, about the upcoming CBA negotiations. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We are free and available on all podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey, wherever you get your pods. Check out this pod. We're also on YouTube. The comments help a million times. I sincerely appreciate those. Also, if you listen on Apple Podcasts, drop a review. We haven't gotten a review on Apple Podcasts in a minute, and There's like one review from like 2 reviews ago that I just checked, and it's like all this dude does is talk about Twitter. And I feel like I don't talk about Twitter that much, or I try not to just talk about Twitter that much. If I do, I apologize. But some reviews on Apple would be incredible. If you're on Apple, go drop a review. They help out a ton. Helps the show look popular and all that good stuff so that we can keep bringing you the absolute best Rockets coverage that we can here at Locked on Rockets. So with that, as I'm scratching my nose on the YouTube show, that's fantastic. Anyways, that's great content right there. Nice little ASMR for all of our audio listeners and a nice little visual Easter egg. So with that, let's talk a little bit about, this is what happens. This is the peek behind the curtain. I hope you guys know that like I hit record and I just go. That has been my philosophy for a long time, unless I have just an egregious error where like I misspeak on somebody's name or I get something just factually incorrect in the podcast. And I'm like, wait, let me like redo that take or something. Or if I just botch something right at the beginning of a segment. But I just hit record and I just run it. And we just, whatever comes out of my mouth is what lands on the podcast. So hopefully it comes across more genuine that way. I think it's a much more genuine product and genuine experience when we do it like that. But oh well, I digress. Just derailing the segment here at the top of segment 3. Let's talk a little collective bargaining agreement, CBA. So Shams Charania reported earlier this week that there are 2 new topics, in serious talks, new items as far as the NBA CBA is concerned, as far as discussions with the CBA are concerned moving forward. And those 2 topics were the draft age eligibility being moved from 19 to 18, essentially the return of high school to NBA as like a pipeline direct from high school to the NBA. And then measure that allows players for citing mental health similar to physical injury. Now, those were the 2 new items. The other item, though, mentioned in Shams's article is potentially stricter or harsher penalties for luxury tax paying teams, organizations, what have you. So I want to talk about this from 2 separate angles. Now, the first of which, as Shams originally reported this, the getting rid of the one and done rule, the age limit for the NBA. Woj came out later that day and basically dumped a bunch of cold water on the report, saying that while lowering the 19 and over draft age will be a significant part of the NBA/NBPA collective bargaining discussions, sources tell ESPN nothing has advanced on elimination of the one and done rule. So Woj was basically like, Shams, you're wrong. I live for the back and forth between the master and the protege between these 2 guys. But I will say that even if it's pushed a little bit further down the pipeline, whenever that one and done rule does change, that draft year is going to be absolutely insane, because that's going to be what is effectively heralded as the double draft, where 1 year you will get all of the college students who are coming out that year, and you will get all of the high school students that are also coming out that year. And as that relates and pertains back to the Houston Rockets, a team that does not own its own draft capital for the next half decade or so, at least in 3 separate drafts, as a result of the Russell Westbrook-Chris Paul trade, that's a bit hard to stomach. Because if that year, if the double draft year lands on a year that the Rockets do not outright control their own pick, that's really disappointing, because you basically miss out on one of the deepest and best drafts in recent memory, because it's effectively, you're getting 2 cracks at it, right? You're getting 2 draft classes for the price of 1. And in Shams's report, it looked like it might be as soon as the 2024 draft, which in that draft, the Rockets do not own their outright pick. It's very unfortunate. It is owed to OKC. It has top 4 protections on it, but it is owed to OKC. And it's not a swap, it's the outright pick. So that sucks. The Rockets do, however, own the Brooklyn Nets pick in the 2024 draft. So we know how quickly things can change in the NBA landscape. Maybe things get expedited. Maybe the double draft is right around the corner, and the information that Woj got is not reliable, which doesn't happen a lot, but things can change very, very quickly in the NBA landscape. So all that matters, and the main point to take away here, is that whenever the double draft happens, if it's not, 10 years down the line when the Rockets are back in control of their own draft assets, or if it lands on a year that the Rockets don't have control of their pick, it's just going to be a tough pill to swallow, to not have that asset in play for a year that is going to be so big. And any picks that do land on the year that ultimately happens, and I'm sure the way the NBA works, there will be plenty of advance notice on the year that this ultimately does happen. Teams are going to be valuing those picks at a much higher threshold than any other picks because, again, effectively you're getting 2 cracks at the draft. 2 draft hauls, two draft classes in 1 year, a 2-for-1 special, if you will. Now, Woj did go on further down the list to say that if the one and done rule is changed, it's expected that the starting date would be several years into the future, in part because of commitments already made by teams to trade future draft picks under the current framework of the 19 and over system. So that is something to take into account, right? If they changed this and it went into effect like a year from now, every team that has mortgaged their draft future for the foreseeable future would be pissed, because then you'd be like, all right, well, we screwed up. We gave away all of our picks and now we don't have access to this draft. So yeah, I'm inclined to believe and agree that they're probably going to kick that can a little bit further down the road. I also do think that whenever they do, and this is a quick aside before we get to the other point that I wanted to make, whenever they do get rid of the one and done rule, I do think that right now, especially because where the NBA is at with its G League system, there's a lot of potential there for there to be kind of that direct pipeline to the NBA as by way of the G League system. You know, maybe a bit more of a minor league kind of farming system for the NBA, if you will, rather than as it currently stands, where it's like you draft a player and you immediately throw them into the deep end and they're playing at the NBA level. Maybe drafting a player and having them spend, you know, a quarter of a season, half season at the G League level, and then bringing them up to the NBA level once they've, you know, been in the weight room, once they get acclimated to the game plan, the strategies, all that stuff, the speed of the game, all of that, rather than just bringing some fresh-faced 18-year-old high school kid and you throw him out there on the court to go guard Giannis Antetokounmpo or Luka Doncic. Like, that's just kind of crazy to think about. So we'll see how that all plays out. The other side of this that I wanted to talk about as it relates to the Houston Rockets was the idea of potentially harsher penalties facing luxury tax paying teams. Now, as dirty as this makes me feel, and I'm probably going to have to go take a shower after recording this, Joe LaCobe, whatever, Warriors owner, has been vocal about the idea of giving a discount, right? Like a homegrown discount to teams that draft and retain their own all-star, superstar talent, right? Because the Warriors are very much in that boat, right? They drafted Steph, they drafted Clay, they drafted Draymond. And yeah, they've got contracts and stuff aside those two guys that they've got to pay and grow and retain and all that. But that big three is taking up and eating up a lot of their cap. And the Warriors drafted those guys and grew them and kept them. And I hate agreeing with this, but I absolutely think that a team that manages to draft and grow their own homegrown talent should not be penalized from a luxury tax threshold standpoint. Now, a team like, you know, the Lakers, who just wants to go out there and outright sign players and poach players from other organizations and whatever, like they outright signed LeBron, they traded for AD, they traded for Russ. A team that finds themselves in that position and then is paying an obscene amount of luxury tax because of that, then by all means, tax the hell out of them. But giving teams a break on luxury tax payments or penalties based on homegrown talent, I think is an absolute win. And I think it's also an absolute win for small market teams, for teams to be able to retain superstar players that they draft, right? Rather than being kind of pigeonholed into, oh my God, we got to pay this guy an obscene amount of money and we're a small market team and maybe, you know, there's financial ramifications, all this stuff. So I think that it would be an absolute win. And as it relates back to the Houston Rockets, right now, doesn't matter. The Rockets are, you know, one of the lower payrolls in the association, at least going off recent memory, and they're not in danger of paying the luxury tax anytime soon because they're not in danger of being a competitive team, at least not within the next couple seasons, unless something drastically changes overnight. That said, this Rockets team has an abundance of young talent with a lot of sky-high potential, right? KPJ could be a star. Jalen Green could be a superstar. Jabari could be a superstar. Alperen Sengun could be a star, right? Tari Eason might be a star further down the line. He's got all the skills. He's got, you know, an insane ceiling, could be a DPOY caliber type player, you know, further down the line. All these different players that you're going to have to pay at some point in time. And you're going to have to choose between paying these guys or wheeling and dealing them. And even if you're not paying these guys, you might be paying another guy. You might not be paying an unknown entity who you trade for further down the line, a more established star player to kind of, you know, bring back into the fold, or bring into the fold, I should say, to kind of jettison this team back into playoff contention, championship contention. And so that could be the guy that you pay further down the line. But the Rockets have a lot of homegrown talent, and I would hate to see this team get dinged financially because they drafted well and they have a bunch of guys who become either borderline all-stars, or potentially superstars further down the line. It's a reality of the NBA that at some point, these guys are going to have to get paid. The Phoenix Suns just dealt with this, with extending Mikal Bridges and letting DeAndre Ayton go to restricted free agency and now having to match his contract. And now he's getting paid out the wazoo. So the Rockets are going to be very much in this exact same boat, probably 3 to 4 years down the line, as all the rookie extensions potentially start kicking in for Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Kevin Porter Jr. with, up for discussion for extension this offseason already. It would be great if the Rockets got a discount because they drafted a majority of these young guys, right? It'd be great if they could have that as, an added benefit to, hey, we drafted well, we want to keep these guys, great. Now we're going to get a bit of a discount. I don't know what that would look like. I haven't even begun to think of hypotheticals of what a discount for homegrown talent would look like, but I agree with the Warriors that should be the route that we go for an abundance of different reasons. So those were the two implications that I wanted to bring up from the recent reporting regarding Shams Charania and the future CBA negotiations. That's all I've got for today's episode. Be on the lookout for our very next episode. It'll be with guest Chris Gardner from the Houston Roundball Review. We'll be talking about the 3 most important Rockets going into this next NBA season. Also, I want to know what you think about the rankings. Jalen Green, number 62 on the ESPN Top 100 list. Kevin Porter Jr. not ranked amongst the top 22 point guards in the association. How do you feel about those rankings? Let me know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. We're also on YouTube, mentioned it a couple times. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.